The unexpected threat Earth had always been a quiet, unassuming planet in the vast expanse of the galaxy. To the Galactic Council, it was nothing more than a speck, a world of primitive humans with barely any technological advancement. The Council, composed of alien species from across the stars, had little interest in Earth. After all, what was a tiny planet like Earth to a galaxy full of mighty civilizations with advanced fleets, towering cities, and unimaginable powers? It was insignificant, a place far from the reach of the Council's major concerns. The Council watched over the universe, keeping the peace, but they had other priorities, and Earth was never one of them. The galaxy was home to powerful empires like the Xinthians, whose ships could warp across stars in the blink of an eye. Then there were the Vazari, an ancient race with minds as sharp as their weapons. And let's not forget the Xal'rak, a brutal, war-hungry species whose armies had wiped out entire star systems in their quest for conquest. But Earth was a curiosity, a place they never thought twice about. Until the Xal'rak made their decision. The Xal'rak, aggressive and merciless, had always viewed their species as superior. Their ships were sleek, their soldiers ruthless, and their technology unmatched in brutality. The Xal'rak had no use for diplomacy or negotiation. They saw themselves as the ultimate conquerors, and they set their sights on Earth, a planet that, in their eyes, was ripe for the taking. They had been scouting the galaxy, looking for new territories to claim, and they decided that Earth, with its primitive defenses and limited technology, was the perfect target. The Xal'rak didn't bother with the usual steps that other invaders took. There was no subtlety, no reconnaissance, no plan to infiltrate Earth from within. They came with force, their fleets appearing without warning in Earth's orbit. Their ships were massive, designed for war, their engines roaring as they cut through the void of space. It was a show of power meant to strike fear into the hearts of those who would dare resist them. As the Xal'rak approached, the Galactic Council remained unconcerned. After all, Earth was barely even a blip on their radar. It was a primitive planet that didn't deserve their attention. The Council members were more focused on the larger, more sophisticated threats to galactic peace. They scoffed at the idea that Earth would be any different from the hundreds of other planets the Xal'rak had destroyed over the centuries. The idea of humans fighting back was laughable. They didn't even have faster-than-light travel, let alone the ability to stand up to a fully armed, advanced alien army. In the Council chambers, a group of the most powerful and influential species in the galaxy sat, oblivious to the growing storm. Some were discussing trade routes, others were focused on political maneuvering between star systems. Earth's situation was nothing more than a side note to them, dismissed with a few words of indifference. To them, humanity was no different than any other species they had seen fall under the might of the Xal'rak. The Council's view of Earth was one of irrelevance. They believed that the Xal'rak would wipe out the humans in days, if not hours. It would be over before it even began. But the Xal'rak underestimated one thing about Earth. They didn't understand the humans who lived there. Humans had always been a species of great tenacity and resourcefulness. It wasn't that they had the most advanced technology. It was that they had something far more dangerous, the ability to fight against all odds. They had survived countless wars, natural disasters, and threats of extinction. They had faced adversity and risen from it every time. The Xal'rak had no way of knowing that this unassuming planet, this simple rock in the galaxy, was more than ready to defend itself. As the Xal'rak made their first strike, humanity began to respond. The attack on Earth's major cities was swift and brutal, but there was something the Xal'rak hadn't anticipated. The people of Earth didn't panic. They didn't bow to the might of the invaders. Instead, they did what humans had always done. They fought back. The Earth's military forces, though outmatched in technology, rallied together. Every soldier, every pilot, every citizen who could fight, took up arms. It wasn't just the armies. that responded, but the people. Scientists, engineers, and civilians all pitched in. Earth had no large fleets to defend itself with, no advanced weapons to challenge the Xal'rak's power, but it had something else, a drive, a will to survive that was unmatched. They fought with everything they had, using every scrap of technology, and every ounce of determination to push back the invaders. At first, the Xal'rak were confident. They believed the humans would crumble beneath their might, just as every other civilization had. They laughed at the resistance, dismissing it as a mere nuisance. But with every day that passed, they found themselves facing something they hadn't expected, a resistance that was growing stronger, smarter, and more coordinated with each passing hour. The Galactic Council watched from the sidelines, still, too focused on their own issues to see the true potential of humanity. They were so sure that the Xal'rak would win that they didn't even bother to intervene. They couldn't imagine that this small, insignificant planet could pose any real threat. As the Xal'rak pushed forward, humans began to surprise them at every turn. Small victories piled up. The resistance was relentless, determined, and willing to sacrifice everything to defend their home. The Xal'rak, with all their power and arrogance, soon found themselves in a fight they had never expected. And the Galactic Council, watching from their high towers, had no idea what was coming. They had underestimated Earth and its people. And it was too late to stop it. The stage was set. The Xal'rak, thinking they had already won, would soon realize they were in for the fight of their lives. And the Galactic Council, still dismissing Earth's strength, would soon find out that the humans had a far greater power than anyone had ever imagined. Earth was about to show the galaxy exactly what it meant to mess with humanity. The Xal'rak's confidence. The Xal'rak were a species born from the cold, hard void of space. They had no patience for weakness, no tolerance for those who couldn't stand up to their might. Their empire was built on the wreckage of countless civilizations that had fallen before them. They had swept through planets with ease, obliterating anyone who dared oppose them. Their ships were designed for war, sleek and deadly, their weapons capable of ripping through entire fleets. They had never been denied victory, and they didn't believe for a second that Earth would be any different. They were the masters of destruction, the conquerors of galaxies, and they would not be stopped by a primitive species like humanity. As the Xal'rak fleet descended upon Earth's orbit, they did so with an air of complete superiority. Their flagship, a massive towering vessel that could eclipse an entire city, led the charge. It glided through space effortlessly, its weapon systems primed for action. The rest of the fleet followed in formation, hundreds of ships arranged in perfect order. They were an overwhelming force, and they knew it. The Xal'rak were not concerned with subtlety. Their tactics were direct and brutal. They wanted to strike fear into the hearts of every living being on Earth. The moment they arrived, they would show the humans that they were nothing more than insects beneath the boots of the Xal'rak. The Council, back in their chambers, was still indifferent. They watched the Xal'rak as advance with detached interest, unconcerned by the impending invasion. Earth was insignificant to them. They had more important matters to attend to: trade deals, intergalactic politics, and the balance of power in the galaxy. The invasion of Earth was merely a passing event, something that would be over before anyone even had time to notice. The Council had seen it all before. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, their brief moments of greatness snuffed out by the superior forces of more powerful species. They had seen planets like Earth, with their low technology and primitive ways, crushed under the weight of interstellar might. So when the Xal'rak made their move, the Council didn't bat an eye. They assumed it would be a quick conquest. They assumed humanity would fold under the pressure. The Xal'rak were certain of their victory. The leaders of the Xal'rak fleet laughed as they watched Earth cities appear on their screens. It was almost too easy. The humans had no defense against them. Their weapons were outdated, their armies ill-prepared. The Xal'rak had surveyed Earth from a distance and knew what they were dealing with. The humans were primitive. They had nothing that could challenge the might of the Xal'rak. They had no real space fleet, no weapons that could stand up to their advanced technology. The Xal'rak leaders were confident. They were sure they could wipe out humanity in a matter of days, maybe even hours. As their ships made their final approach, the Xal'rak commanders exchanged smiles of satisfaction. It was almost laughable. The humans would put up a fight, of course, but it would be futile. They would die, just like all the other species before them. There was no question in their minds that they were about to achieve yet another glorious victory. The Xal'rak had faced countless enemies, and they had never lost. Why would Earth be any different? In the distance, Earth's defenses stirred, but the Xal'rak weren't concerned. They saw the primitive missiles and laser systems the humans launched as nothing more than distractions. Their shields would absorb any damage, their weapons would cut through anything Earth could throw at them. It was all so predictable. The Xal'rak fleet opened fire, their weapons unleashing devastating barrages upon Earth's cities. The explosions lit up the sky like fireworks, buildings crumbling into dust as they were obliterated by the sheer power of the Xal'rak's weapons. But as the Xal'rak rained destruction down upon Earth, something unexpected began to happen. Humanity didn't break. They didn't flee in terror. Instead, they began to fight back. The military, long underestimated by the invaders, rallied to defend their planet. Earth's armed forces, despite their lack of advanced technology, fought with an intensity and determination that caught the Xal'rak off guard. Fighter jets zoomed through the sky, firing laser beams at the Xal'rak ships. Ground troops mobilized, taking to the streets to fight the invaders with everything they had. The Xal'rak were stunned. They had expected resistance, but not like this. The humans were fighting with a ferocity that was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just the military. Ordinary civilians, those with no experience in combat, had taken up arms to protect their families, their homes. It was chaos, but it was chaos that the Xal'rak had not anticipated. Back on their flagship, the Xal'rak commanders watched the unfolding scene with disbelief. They had expected the humans to be terrified, to cower in fear and surrender without a fight. But instead, they were seeing the opposite. The humans were defiant. They were throwing everything they had at the Xal'rak, and they were doing it without hesitation. The Xal'rak had underestimated them. They thought the humans were weak, that they were nothing more than primitive beings incapable of resisting the might of the Xal'rak. But they were wrong. The humans were not weak. They were strong. Stronger than the Xal'rak could have ever imagined. As the battle raged on, the Galactic Council took notice. They watched the resistance unfold with growing concern. Some members of the council began to ask questions. How had the humans managed to fight back so fiercely? How had they built such a strong defense so quickly? The council, still confident that the Xal'rak would win, began to feel uneasy. There was something about this resistance that didn't make sense. Earth, the so-called primitive planet, was proving to be more resilient than anyone had expected. And the Xal'rak, with all their power, were starting to realize that they might have bitten off more than they could chew, but the Xal'rak were not ones to back down. They would not admit defeat so easily. They would crush the humans, just as they had crushed so many others. The fight was far from over, and the Xal'rak were determined to see it through to the end. The battle had only just begun, and the Xal'rak were not about to let a few surprises stop them. However, deep down, a small part of them couldn't help but wonder, had they made a mistake in underestimating Earth? Earth's hidden strength. As the battle continued, the Xal'rak began to realize something they hadn't accounted for. They had assumed that Earth's primitive defenses would collapse under their overwhelming power, but what they were encountering wasn't just resistance. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous for an invader to face. Humanity had always been underestimated by the powerful alien species that roamed the galaxy. The Xal'rak had made the same mistake. They thought that humans with their basic technology and limited resources would break easily, but they were wrong. Humans had a unique strength, one that no invader could understand easily. Their power wasn't in the size of their weapons or in their fleets. It was in their ability to adapt, to improvise, and to rise above any obstacle they encountered. It was a power born of centuries of hardship, a strength that had allowed them to survive wars, disease, famine, and destruction. Time and time again, humanity had faced extinction, and every time they had found a way to survive and rebuild. This was the strength the Xal'rak didn't understand, but would soon come to regret underestimating. On the ground across Earth, civilians and soldiers alike were fighting back in ways that no one had expected. Entire cities that had been destroyed or under heavy attack began to rebuild and organize almost overnight. People were working together in ways that defied the usual patterns of chaos that would follow such an invasion. People who had never held a weapon before were now becoming the front line of defense. They were using whatever they could find: old tools, broken machinery, and repurposed technology to create new weapons and defenses. It wasn't about having the best equipment. It was about using what they had with maximum efficiency and ingenuity. The military leaders were no longer just coordinating defense. They were now training and leading civilians who were turning into soldiers with incredible speed. They were teaching people how to use basic firearms and explosives, how to take down enemy drones, and how to strike back from unexpected angles. Humanity was creating guerrilla tactics that were difficult for the Xal'rak to counter. They had never fought an enemy like this before, one that was unpredictable and willing to sacrifice everything for their home. Human ingenuity was at the heart of their resistance. Scientists, engineers, and inventors who had once focused on peaceful purposes were now using their knowledge to design weapons of defense that were unlike anything the Xal'rak had seen before. Earth's resourcefulness was truly shining through. Even Earth's relatively primitive technologies like electromagnetic pulses and basic hacking devices were being repurposed in ways that created huge problems for the Xal'rak forces. Earth was beginning to make use of every inch of its planet, not just in the battle for the cities, but in every part of the world where the Xal'rak had assumed control. The Xal'rak had learned something crucial. They had assumed that humanity would fall into panic and disarray, but instead they were facing a force of organized, determined people who fought not just for survival, but for the very soul of their species. It was a fight for the future of the planet and the future of everything that made them human. The Xal'rak were not prepared for this kind of fight because they had always relied on overwhelming force to crush their enemies and never considered that their enemy might fight with something far more unpredictable and dangerous. As the humans pushed back the invaders, they began to win small victories. Each victory felt like a message sent to the Xal'rak that Earth would not be an easy target. Each loss the Xal'rak suffered came at a high cost, not just in terms of military losses, but in terms of morale. The humans were resilient, but they were also clever. In a world that had been underestimated by the rest of the galaxy, Earth's people had spent centuries learning how to survive against the odds, and it was this knowledge that was making them so dangerous now. The more the Xal'rak fought, the more they began to see the terrible truth. Earth's greatest weapon was not its technology, it was the will of its people. As the first major wave of attacks from the Xal'rak subsided, Earth's forces started to regroup in more organized defense lines. Some of the more skilled military units began to set traps for the Xal'rak ships, using tactics that the invaders had never expected. Some human engineers managed to reverse engineer some of the Xal'rak technology that had fallen during the initial attacks and began to use it against them. The idea that humans could fight with their own version of the Xal'rak's own weapons left the invaders shaken. They had never encountered this kind of resolve from any species before. The Galactic Council had begun to take notice of the situation on Earth, but they were still hesitant to get involved. They had assumed the Xal'rak would crush Earth quickly, and they couldn't understand how things had spiraled out of control so fast. The council was in disbelief, seeing their earlier assumptions unraveling before their eyes. They watched as Earth's resistance turned into something more than just a fight for survival. It became a symbol of defiance. It became clear that humanity wasn't going to lose easily. The Galactic Council, however, wasn't the only one watching the battle unfold. The Xal'rak began to notice something even more troubling. The humans were not just defending their home. They were fighting to take back what had been taken from them. They were fighting for their families, their cities, their way of life. The Xal'rak had expected an enemy that would fight out of fear or desperation, but what they were facing was far more dangerous. The humans were fighting with everything they had, because they believed in their right to exist and their right to live free of oppression. The battle had become something more than just an invasion. It had become a war of identity for humanity. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to prove that they were a force to be reckoned with, a force that no matter how small and how primitive could stand up to the might of any invader. Humanity had always been underestimated by those who thought themselves superior, and this time, the Xal'rak would learn the hard way that you never underestimate the will of Earth's people. The Xal'rak might have had the technology, the firepower, the ships, and the weapons, but they didn't have what humanity had. They didn't have the resolve, the ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit that made Earth's people who they were. The battle was far from over. But one thing was certain: Earth had shown the galaxy that no matter how big the enemy, no matter how powerful the invader, Earth would always fight back, and it would always rise up when it was at its most desperate hour. This wasn't just the fight of a planet's survival, it was the fight for the very essence of humanity itself. The Galactic Council reacts as the conflict on Earth raged on. The Xal'rak began to feel the strain of their initial confidence. What they had assumed would be a swift and effortless conquest was turning into an unexpected nightmare. The humans, despite their technological limitations, were proving to be an insurmountable challenge. The Xal'rak were accustomed to crushing their enemies with sheer force, but humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered. They fought not just for survival, but for a deeper, more intrinsic reason that the invaders couldn't fully comprehend. Back in the chambers of the Galactic Council, things were starting to change. The Council had, until now, remained indifferent to Earth's fate. The invasion of Earth was just another in a long list of conquests for the Xal'rak, a species that had never failed to subjugate a planet. The Council members, with their vast intellects and centuries of experience in galactic politics, had assumed that the Xal'rak's advanced technology and military might would ensure a quick and easy victory. They had seen countless worlds rise and fall, and Earth, with its primitive technology, seemed like a minor threat at best. But now, as the reports from the front lines began to flood in, the Council members could no longer ignore what was happening. On Earth, they had assumed the Xal'rak would quickly quash the resistance, and that the humans would fall in line like so many others before them. Instead, the situation was far more complicated than they had anticipated. Humanity was not simply resisting. They were organizing, adapting, and countering every move the Xal'rak made with startling efficiency. The invaders, once so confident in their victory, were now being forced to regroup and rethink their strategy. Within the Council chambers, a heated debate began to take shape. Some members of the Council, particularly those who had long viewed Earth as a lesser world, still believed that the Xal'rak would ultimately prevail. They dismissed the human resistance as nothing more than a nuisance that would eventually be crushed under the weight of the Xal'rak's power. But others, more seasoned and pragmatic, were beginning to see things differently. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now it was clear that Earth was a much more formidable opponent than they had given it credit for. A faction of the Council, made up of species who had once been close to extinction and understood the value of survival, began to voice their concerns. They had seen the same spark in other civilizations that had fought back against overwhelming odds. They recognized that humanity's will to survive was unlike any other. The Council had seen powerful empires fall, but what they were witnessing on Earth was different. It wasn't just about technology or military strength. It was something deeper, something inherent in the human spirit. And that was something the Council was struggling to understand. As the debate continued, the Xal'rak's failure on Earth was becoming impossible to ignore. The resistance was growing stronger, and the invaders were beginning to suffer significant losses. The once unstoppable Xal'rak fleet was now retreating and reorganizing, a move that was highly unusual for a species known for its aggressiveness and overwhelming force. The tide of battle was shifting, and the Council could no longer sit on the sidelines. If Earth continued to resist, the consequences for the Xal'rak and the Galactic Council could be far-reaching. The Council members who had previously dismissed Earth's significance were now starting to reconsider. Some began to argue that Earth's survival would have lasting consequences for the balance of power in the galaxy. If the humans were able to defeat the Xal'rak, it would send a powerful message to every species in the galaxy. It would challenge the notion that advanced technology and military might were the only measures of power. It would prove that even a small, seemingly insignificant planet could rise up and challenge the established order. The realization was dawning on the Council that they might have made a grave mistake in underestimating Earth. But even as they came to terms with this, there were still those who refused to acknowledge the full extent of the threat humanity posed. They believed that the Xal'rak, once they regained their footing, would finish the job quickly and that the humans would ultimately fall. It was a belief rooted in arrogance, a belief that humanity could never truly change the course of galactic history. Meanwhile, the Xal'rak were adjusting their tactics, but the damage had already been done. Their confidence was shaken, and their initial plans were in disarray. The humans, with their resourcefulness and tenacity, had not only slowed the Xal'rak as advanced, but had begun to take the fight to them. Small-scale skirmishes turned into full-blown battles as Earth's forces launched counterattacks, striking at the heart of the Xal'rak's operations. The Xal'rak, who had thought themselves invincible, now found themselves fighting for their own survival. But despite the mounting pressure, the Xal'rak commanders were determined not to lose face. They had a reputation to uphold, and they would not admit defeat so easily. They began to shift their focus, abandoning certain strategies in favor of more desperate measures. They began to use more devastating weapons, weapons that were capable of annihilating entire cities with a single strike. But even as they escalated their attacks, they couldn't break the human resolve. The people of Earth fought harder with each passing day, and the Xal'rak's forces began to dwindle back. In the Council chambers, the realization that Earth was not as easily conquered as they had thought was sinking in. The members who had once dismissed Earth's resistance now found themselves scrambling to figure out what to do next. The Xal'rak were faltering, but the Council could no longer afford to ignore the consequences of their involvement. If the Xal'rak failed, it would have serious implications for the entire galaxy. The Council's credibility would be shattered, and they would lose all authority over the galactic community. For the first time, some Council members began to propose a different solution. Instead of standing by and watching the Xal'rak struggle, perhaps it was time to intervene, but not to support the Xal'rak. The idea was radical. What if they offered humanity a place at the table? What if they recognized Earth's resilience and gave humanity the tools they needed to defend themselves more effectively? The idea was met with resistance, but it was clear that the Council had no choice but to consider the possibility. The situation on Earth was no longer just a localized conflict. It had become a galactic crisis. The Xal'rak's failure on Earth had caused ripples throughout the galaxy, and the Council could no longer ignore what was happening. Whether they liked it or not, humanity had proven that it was not to be underestimated. And now, the Galactic Council would have to decide whether to continue to stand by and watch or to intervene in a way that could forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. as the council deliberated. One thing was certain: Earth's fight was far from over. The Xal'rak had underestimated humanity once, but they would not make the same mistake again. And the Galactic Council would have to choose how they would respond to the human uprising, a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy for centuries to come. Earth's unexpected weapon, the conflict on Earth, had reached a critical point, and the Xal'rak were starting to realize that they were no longer in control. What had begun as a swift invasion had quickly turned into a prolonged and costly war. The Xal'rak, once so confident in their overwhelming power, now found themselves facing a humanity that refused to yield. Despite their advanced technology and formidable fleets, the Xal'rak were beginning to understand that the humans were not as easy to defeat as they had assumed. The resistance on Earth was not just about brute force. It was about strategy, about the ability to think quickly and act decisively. Humanity's response to the invasion was not the result of superior technology, but of an intrinsic will to survive that burned brighter than the Xal'rak had ever imagined. Earth's armies, while not as advanced as those of the Xal'rak, had become increasingly efficient in their tactics. Civilians had joined the fight alongside trained soldiers, creating a unified front that the invaders struggled to understand. The humans weren't just defending their homes. They were fighting for their very existence. The Xal'rak, who had relied on their sheer firepower to crush their enemies, found themselves in uncharted territory. They had never faced an adversary that fought with such resourcefulness and determination. The Xal'rak were accustomed to planets falling beneath the weight of their advanced weaponry, but Earth was proving to be a different kind of challenge. With each passing day, the humans became more organized, more inventive, and more formidable. And just when the Xal'rak thought they had the upper hand, something happened that would change the course of the war. It wasn't a new weapon or a technological breakthrough that tipped the scales in humanity's favor. It was something far simpler and far more dangerous: the human ability to adapt. Over the course of the battle, the humans had been learning, evolving, and improvising in ways that the Xal'rak couldn't anticipate. Earth's military forces, once on the defensive, began to take the fight to the Xal'rak. The human resistance had become an unstoppable force of nature, using whatever they could find to create weapons and tactics that the Xal'rak couldn't counter. The turning point came when a group of Earth's brightest mind scientists, engineers, and military leaders worked together to create a new kind of weapon. It wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. It was something more subtle, more insidious. Humanity's weapon was their ingenuity. They had created a device that could disrupt the Xal'rak as advanced technology. Using a combination of electromagnetic pulses and hacking software, they developed a system capable of scrambling the Xal'rak ship's communication and navigation systems. It was a simple idea, but it was one that the Xal'rak had never anticipated. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now they were paying the price. The first time the humans used this new weapon, it was like a light switch being flipped. The Xal'rak fleet, once so confident in their superiority, suddenly found themselves blind and disoriented. Their ships, once capable of moving with lightning speed and precision, now drifted helplessly through space, unable to communicate with one another or properly aim their weapons. The humans struck with calculated precision, using their newfound advantage to cripple the Xal'rak's fleet one ship at a time. The invaders, who had once thought themselves unstoppable, were now reeling from the unexpected attack. It wasn't just a defeat on the battlefield. It was a psychological blow that shook their confidence to its core. As the Xal'rak's forces began to falter, the Galactic Council watched from afar, still unsure of what to make of humanity's sudden resurgence. The Council had long dismissed Earth as a minor player in the galaxy, a planet that had nothing to offer but its resources. But now, as they watched the Xal'rak struggle, the Council members were forced to reconsider. They had underestimated Earth's potential, and now it was clear that humanity was capable of much more than they had ever imagined. The council members began to ask themselves difficult questions. How had Earth done this? How had they turned the tide of the war so quickly? And more importantly, how would the galaxy react if humanity succeeded in driving off the Xal'rak? Back on Earth, the human resistance was more determined than ever. With the Xal'rak as advanced technology now crippled, Earth's forces began to push forward with renewed vigor. The humans knew they couldn't rest on their laurels. This was their one chance to win, and they were willing to risk everything to take it. Military units across the planet launched coordinated attacks against the remaining Xal'rak strongholds, striking with precision and swiftness. They had learned from their past mistakes, and now they were using every advantage at their disposal to bring the invaders to their knees. The Xal'rak, now scrambling to recover from the human counteroffensive, began to show signs of desperation. They had once believed that Earth was nothing more than a small, insignificant world in the galaxy, but now they were seeing that humanity was not to be underestimated. The humans had found a way to fight back, and the Xal'rak were paying the price for their arrogance. The once proud invaders who had expected to crush Earth in a matter of days were now facing a prolonged struggle that they hadn't anticipated. The humans, now armed with a new sense of purpose and the confidence that came with their unexpected victory, pressed on. Earth's forces continued to strike the Xal'rak at every turn, pushing them back from one stronghold after another. The resistance was no longer just about survival. It was about showing the galaxy that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. And with each victory, the humans grew bolder, more confident in their ability to take on the Xal'rak and anyone else who threatened their home. In the council chambers, the Galactic Council began to feel the weight of their decision to ignore Earth's potential. What had once seemed like a minor conflict was now becoming a galaxy-wide crisis. The Xal'rak were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been, and the humans had proven that they could stand up to even the most advanced alien species. The council members, once so confident in their own superiority, now found themselves questioning their previous assumptions about humanity. Earth was not a minor player in the galactic stage. It was a power in its own right. And as the Xal'rak's defeat seemed inevitable, the council had to ask themselves, what would the galaxy look like once humanity had taken its place among the stars? The question remained, would the council intervene and try to take credit for Earth's success, or would they allow humanity to rise on its own terms? One thing was certain: Earth had changed the game, and the galaxy would never be the same. The final stand, the Xal'rak fleet, was now on the brink of collapse. What had begun as a mighty force, unstoppable and brimming with confidence, was now reeling under the pressure of humanity's relentless resistance. Earth had taken them by surprise, and with each passing day, the humans proved to be more resourceful, more determined, and more dangerous than the invaders had ever anticipated. What was supposed to be a swift conquest had turned into a bloody, prolonged war that the Xal'rak had no intention of losing. But even as they regrouped and prepared for a final push, the shadow of defeat loomed over them. They could feel it, creeping like a cold wind through their ranks. The human resistance, now unified and organized in ways that even the Xal'rak couldn't have imagined, had begun to take the fight to them with fierce precision. Earth's military forces, bolstered by ordinary civilians who had picked up arms to defend their homes, were no longer retreating. Instead, they were on the offensive, striking at the heart of the Xal'rak's power. From the wreckage of destroyed cities to the mountains and forests that had once been untouched by war, the fight raged on. Human ingenuity had transformed every corner of the planet into a battleground, and the Xal'rak found themselves caught in the thick of it. The final battle was now imminent. The Xal'rak knew that they couldn't afford to retreat any longer. Their pride was at stake. The Galactic Council, still watching from a distance, had made it clear that they would not intervene, leaving the Xal'rak to face the wrath of humanity alone. They had miscalculated, thinking that Earth would fall like all the other planets before it. But now the situation had become a matter of survival. The Xal'rak commanders gathered in their flagship, their expressions grim as they prepared for the inevitable clash. Their once formidable fleet had been severely depleted, and their communication systems were in disarray. Yet, despite the mounting evidence that victory was slipping away, they remained determined to press forward. On Earth, the humans had reached a turning point. The previous battles, the small victories that had slowly worn down the Xal'rak, had given the people of Earth a newfound sense of purpose. They had faced destruction, but now they stood tall. They had been underestimated by the entire galaxy, laughed off as an insignificant species. But the humans had proved time and time again that their strength lay not in the power of their weapons, but in their spirit. The final stand was not just about defeating the Xal'rak. It was about proving to the galaxy that Earth would no longer be pushed around. Humanity was ready to take its place in the universe. The preparations for the final battle were underway. The humans had mobilized every available resource, every weapon, and every tactic at their disposal. The cities that had once been under siege were now hubs of defense, their walls reinforced with everything from salvaged alien technology to homemade bombs. The people had come together like never before, unified by the need to protect their home. Earth's military forces were joined by volunteers who had never seen a battlefield but were ready to fight for their world. Farmers, scientists, teachers, students, every corner of society had turned to war. But despite their strength, the humans knew that this final push would not be easy. The Xal'rak were not going to give up without a fight. Their fleet, although severely weakened, was still a formidable force. The battle would be brutal, and many lives would be lost. But the humans were prepared to pay that price. They had no choice. It was do or die. The night before the final assault, as the world held its breath, a moment of quiet passed over Earth. It was a moment of reflection. People gathered in small groups, around campfires, in underground bunkers, and in the streets, talking of what they had lost and what they still had to fight for. The elderly told stories of how humanity had survived the worst of times, how they had endured even the most dire of circumstances and come out stronger. The younger generations, many of whom had never known peace, listened intently, understanding now more than ever the weight of their history.
In a small town on the outskirts of one of the major battle zones, a young girl named Sophie stood with her father, looking up at the night sky. The stars, once a symbol of peaceful exploration and curiosity, now felt like a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the challenges that humanity would face as they stepped forward into the galactic community. Sophie's father, a former soldier, turned to her and whispered a few words. "We fight because it's who we are. We don't give up. Not now. Not ever." Sophie nodded, her eyes filled with determination. The battle was not just for survival. It was for the future of her people, for the future of her planet. The next day, the final assault began. Xal'rak, unaware of the full extent of humanity's readiness, were caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. The humans had prepared for this day for months, and now they were finally putting everything they had learned into practice. The Xal'rak, still struggling to regain their footing, found themselves in the fight of their lives. The battle raged. Across the sky, with Earth's air forces launching a series of daring raids on the remaining Xal'rak ships. On the ground, humanity's forces stormed the last strongholds of the invaders, fighting with everything they had. Every street, every building became a battleground, but the humans pressed on, refusing to back down. The Xal'rak commanders, desperate to hold on to their last vestiges of power, ordered their forces to retaliate with everything they had. But it was too little, too late. Humanity's resolve was too strong. Their strategies, born of desperation and ingenuity, had outsmarted the Xal'rak at every turn. The once unstoppable invaders were now the ones on the defensive. As the final battle reached its peak, the Xal'rak fleet, once so proud, was shattered. One by one, their ships fell. not just to superior weaponry, but to the determination of a species that refused to surrender. The fight was not over yet, but the Xal'rak were losing. And for the first time since the invasion began, the humans dared to believe that they might actually win. The battle would end with the defeat of the Xal'rak. Not because Earth had more advanced technology, but because humanity had something the invaders lacked: the will to fight for their survival, for their future, for their planet. As the final blow was dealt to the Xal'rak forces, the humans stood victorious. The cost had been high, but the victory was theirs. Earth had fought off the invaders and proved that no matter how small or insignificant a planet might seem, it could still rise to face the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Humanity had sent a message to the universe: Earth would no longer be dismissed, and its people would never give up without a fight. The galactic reckoning, the final echoes of the battle, had faded. The dust settled across Earth, leaving behind the battered remnants of a war-torn planet. The victory was monumental, but it was a victory paid for in blood. Cities lay in ruins, and the landscape was scarred by the intense battles that had raged for months. But amidst the devastation, humanity stood tall, its spirit unbroken. The Xal'rak, who had once believed themselves invincible, had been driven back. Their fleets lay scattered across Earth's atmosphere, their once-proud ships now reduced to wreckage, their invincible commanders defeated. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had survived. They had fought not just for survival, but for the very essence of their existence, for the right to live and to thrive in a universe that had long dismissed them as insignificant. The Xal'rak had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they paid the price for their arrogance. The defeat of the Xal'rak would be a turning point in galactic history. The universe would never be the same again. As Earth's leaders and military commanders began to assess the full scale of the damage, there was a heavy silence that fell over the planet. Victory was bittersweet. There was no celebration, no triumphant shouts. The people were weary, their hearts filled with grief for the lives lost, the families torn apart, the cities reduced to rubble. But there was also something else. Something powerful: pride. They had done it. Earth had stood its ground against a superior force and emerged victorious. They had proven that humanity was not just a small, insignificant planet lost in the vastness of the galaxy. They had proven that Earth had its own place in the stars. But as humanity began to rebuild, they knew that this victory was not the end. It was only the beginning. The Galactic Council, which had watched the events unfold from afar, was now faced with a decision. They could no longer ignore humanity. They could no longer dismiss Earth as a backwater world with no place in the galaxy. The defeat of the Xal'rak had sent shockwaves through the entire galaxy, and now the Council had to confront the reality of what had just happened. The Council, made up of the galaxy's most powerful and ancient species, had long held Earth in contempt. They had viewed humanity as primitive, weak, and unworthy of being taken seriously. Earth's technology was outdated, and its military forces were no match for the advanced fleets of the galactic empires. But now, with the Xal'rak humiliating defeat, the Council was faced with a harsh truth. Humanity had proven that it could stand up to the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The Council, which had once looked down upon Earth with disdain, was now forced to reckon with its rise. Inside the Council chambers, the leaders of the galaxy gathered, their faces tense, their minds racing. The Xal'rak's defeat had shaken the very foundation of their beliefs. How could they have been so wrong? How could they have underestimated a species that had no right to challenge the galactic powers? The Council members, who had once been so confident in their superiority, were now questioning their assumptions. They had watched as the Xal'rak's forces were routed, and now they had to ask themselves, what does this mean for the future of the galaxy? The debate among the Council members was heated. Some still insisted that Earth's victory was a fluke, a temporary setback for the Xal'rak that would soon be corrected. They believed that the humans would eventually fall back into their place as a minor species, their newfound strength fading with time. Others, however, recognized the truth. Humanity had proven that it was not to be underestimated. The humans had not only survived, but had adapted, fought, and overcome every obstacle placed in their path. They had done what no other species in the galaxy had expected them to do. They had defeated the Xal'rak, and in doing so they had shown the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with, as the Council debated. The leaders of Earth, along with their military commanders, were already planning the next steps. Earth had shown that it could defend itself, but the humans knew that their fight wasn't over. The Xal'rak might have been defeated, but the galaxy was vast, and there were many other threats out there. The question now was whether Earth would be left to fend for itself, whether the galaxy would finally recognize humanity's place. Among the stars, the Galactic Council had to make a choice. They could continue to dismiss Earth, as they had done for centuries, or they could offer humanity the recognition it had earned. It was a difficult decision. The Council was made up of powerful species, each with their own agendas and priorities. Some of them feared what humanity's rise meant for the future. If Earth could defeat the Xal'rak, what other species could humanity challenge? What would this mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Others, more pragmatic, saw the potential. In humanity, they understood that Earth's victory was not just about defeating the Xal'rak. It was about the potential for growth, for change, for a new future for the galaxy. After days of heated debate, the Galactic Council came to a decision. They would extend an offer to Earth, recognizing its strength and its place in the galaxy. The Council would no longer look down upon humanity as a primitive species. They would offer humanity a seat at the table, a chance to join the galactic community as equals. But the offer came with a warning. Earth's victory over the Xal'rak had earned humanity respect, but it had also earned suspicion. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity would have to prove itself again and again if it wanted to keep its place among the stars. For Earth, this was a turning point. The victory over the Xal'rak was no longer just a battle won. It was a message to the galaxy. Earth was no longer a minor player. Humanity had shown the universe what it was capable of, and now it was time to take its place on the galactic stage. But as the Council extended its olive branch, humanity knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with challenges and obstacles, but Earth had already proven that it could overcome them. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity, but no longer. Earth had proven that even the most powerful forces in the galaxy could be defeated. And now, the galaxy would have to reckon with the fact that humanity was here to stay. The battle for Earth's future had been won, but the battle for humanity's place in the stars was just beginning. The Council might have offered humanity a seat at the table, but it was up to Earth to decide how it would play its cards in the years to come. One thing was certain: humanity would never be the same. It had proven that it could stand against the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Now, it was ready to face whatever came next. As the final echoes of the war faded into history, the people of Earth stood together on the brink of a new era. They had faced an invincible force and emerged victorious.
The victory over the Xal'rak was not just a triumph over an alien species. It was a triumph over doubt and over the centuries of being overlooked by those who saw Earth as nothing more than a speck in the vastness of the galaxy, the Galactic Council had watched in silence as humanity rose from nothing to challenge the invaders that no one else could defeat. Now Earth was no longer a forgotten world. It was a symbol of resilience, of what could be achieved when a people stood together and refused to back down. But as the humans celebrated their hard-won peace, they knew that this victory was only the beginning. The Xal'rak had been a threat, but there were still many unknowns in the galaxy. Forces beyond their understanding were out there in the vastness of space, waiting to make their move. The Galactic Council had extended its hand to humanity, recognizing their strength, but also acknowledging the dangers that awaited Earth in the future. The journey ahead would not be easy. Earth would face new challenges and new enemies, but now the humans understood something that no other species in the galaxy could take away from them. They understood that no matter how powerful an enemy might be, no matter how dark the future seemed, they would never give up. They would rise to meet whatever threats lay ahead, not with fear, but with the same courage and resolve that had seen them through the darkest days of their past. The Xal'rak were gone, but Earth was forever changed. The people of Earth had fought for their right to exist, and in doing so, had proved that no matter how small or insignificant a world might seem, it could change the course of history. The galaxy would never forget the day when humanity stood tall and showed the universe that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. Now, as humanity looked to the stars, they did so with a new sense of purpose, with the knowledge that their place in the galaxy was no longer in question. They had earned their place, and they would fight to keep it. No longer would they be dismissed or underestimated. They were no longer just humans on a small blue planet. They were Earth's defenders, and they had proven that when the time came, they would rise up and stand against any force that threatened their home. And so the story of Earth and humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. The victory over the Xal'rak had been a defining moment, but it was not the end of their journey. It was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would shape the future of the universe for generations to come. Humanity had earned its place, and now it was time to embrace the stars with open arms. The end.